November 14, 2021, Ridgehaven, Ohio, United States. The courtroom smelled like old wood and fresh anxiety. That's what one of the reporters would write later, that the whole room seemed to sweat with anticipation, the kind of thick, heavy silence that presses against your chest and makes it hard to breathe. 53 people packed into those polished wooden pews. Journalists with notebooks. Locals who'd taken the day off work. And in the front row, directly behind the defense table, a woman in a navy blue dress who hadn't moved in over an hour. Karen Mercer, mother of the defendant. Now, I want you to picture this scene with me. Really see it. The fluorescent lights humming overhead. The American flag hanging limp in the corner. The judge, a stern, silver-haired woman named Ruth Holloway, shuffling papers at her bench. And at the defense table, sitting with his shoulders squared and his chin lifted like he was posing for a yearbook photo, 17-year-old Ethan Mercer. Golden boy. Star quarterback. Convicted murderer. The jury had already done their part. 12 citizens of this quiet Ohio suburb had looked at the evidence, listened to the testimony, and returned a verdict that had echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. Guilty. First-degree murder. But here's the thing about the justice system, and this is something most people don't realize until they're sitting in one of those hard wooden seats, watching it play out in real time. The verdict is just the beginning. What comes next is the sentencing. And in cases involving juvenile defendants, even ones tried as adults, judges have enormous discretion. Ethan Mercer's defense team knew this. They'd spent months preparing for this exact moment. His attorney, a silver-tongued man named Richard Calloway who charged $800 an hour, had just finished a 45-minute presentation on why Ethan deserved leniency. He'd paraded character witnesses before the court. A football coach who spoke of Ethan's leadership qualities. A youth pastor who described a young man with tremendous potential for rehabilitation. A psychologist who testified about adolescent brain development and the possibility of change. The request on the table? Probation. Juvenile detention until age 21. A sealed record. A second chance. And Ethan? Ethan sat there in his tailored charcoal suit, the one his mother had picked out, the one that cost more than Mia Castillo's family made in a week at their restaurant, and he smiled. Not a big smile. Not obvious. Just this slight upturn at the corners of his mouth. The smile of someone who had never, not once in his 17 years of life, faced a consequence that couldn't be negotiated away. Judge Holloway cleared her throat. She began to speak. And that's when it happened. A rustle of fabric. The creak of a wooden pew. 53 heads turning in unison toward the sound. Karen Mercer was standing. Now, this wasn't unusual in and of itself. Family members stand to give statements all the time during sentencing hearings. Everyone in that courtroom assumed Karen was about to do what mothers do, plead for her child. Beg the judge to see the boy she raised. Cry about potential and promise and how her Ethan could never have done something like this. Not really, not in his heart. But something was wrong. You could see it in her posture. In the rigid line of her spine. In the way her hands weren't clasped in supplication but clenched into fists at her sides. In the way she wasn't looking at the judge at all. She was looking directly at her son. And Ethan's smile, that confident, untouchable smile, flickered. Just for a moment. Just long enough for the reporters to notice. "Your Honor," Karen Mercer said, and her voice didn't waver. It didn't break. It came out steady and clear and cold as November frost. "I need to tell you who my son really is." The defense attorney shot to his feet. "Objection." "I'll allow it," Judge Holloway said, and there was something in her eyes. Curiosity, maybe, or the grim recognition that she was witnessing something that didn't happen in courtrooms. Something real. Karen Mercer reached into her purse. She pulled out a manila envelope. And as she walked toward the witness stand, past her husband, who sat frozen with his mouth hanging open, past her son, who had finally stopped smiling, she said 7 words that would be replayed on every news channel in America by nightfall. "I should have done this 18 months ago." Let's take a breath here. Let's step back from that courtroom, from the gasps and the camera flashes and the sound of Ethan Mercer's carefully constructed world beginning to collapse around him. Because here's what you need to understand. What happened in that courtroom didn't come out of nowhere. It was the final domino in a chain that started falling almost 2 years earlier, on a cold November night when a 15-year-old girl walked into the Mercer house for a tutoring session, and never walked out. This is the story of Ethan Mercer, the golden boy of Ridge Haven, Ohio. The star quarterback with the perfect smile and the bright future and the parents who would have done anything, to protect him. This is the story of Mia Castillo, a dreamer, a daughter, a girl whose only crime was being kind to the wrong person, and then having the courage to say no. And this is the story of Karen Mercer, a mother who spent 18 months defending a monster, until she couldn't anymore. Until she found something so damning, so undeniable, that she had to choose between her son and her soul. What did she find? What was in that envelope? And what does it take? What does it really take to make a mother stand up in open court and help send her own child to prison for the rest of his life? We're going to answer all of it. Every question. Every dark corner. Every moment that led to that courtroom. But before we go any further, I want to ask you to do 2 quick things. First, if you're finding this story as compelling as I am, please hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Second, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. I love hearing from viewers all around the world. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Back to Ridge Haven. Back to the boy everyone thought they knew. And the girl who made the fatal mistake of telling him no. If you've never been to Ridge Haven, Ohio, let me paint you a picture. It's the kind of town that looks like it was designed by a Hollywood set decorator who'd been asked to create small-town America. Population 12,000. One main street lined with red brick storefronts. A white steepled church on every other corner. Lawns so green and manicured they look almost aggressive, like the grass itself has something to prove. Friday nights in autumn, the whole town empties into the high school football stadium. You can smell the popcorn from 3 blocks away. The marching band plays fight songs that haven't changed since 1987. And when the Ridge Haven Wolves take the field, when those stadium lights blaze against the cold Ohio sky, everyone forgets about mortgages and medical bills and marriages going stale. For a few hours, everything is simple. Everything is good. This is the town that created Ethan Mercer. Or maybe, and this is the version I lean toward, Ethan Mercer was exactly what a town like this wanted to create. The perfect son. The golden child. Living proof that if you lived in the right zip code, sent your kids to the right schools, showed up at the right church on Sunday morning, everything would turn out fine. By the fall of 2019, Ethan was 17 years old and already a local legend. Quarterback since sophomore year. 3-time all-conference selection. The Toledo Blade had run a feature on him called The Kid with the Golden Arm, and college scouts from 3 Big Ten schools had already come sniffing around. His father, Doug Mercer, owned the most successful real estate development company in the county. His mother, Karen, chaired the hospital auxiliary and organized the annual Christmas charity gala. They lived in a 6-bedroom colonial on Maple Ridge Drive, the kind of house that had a name instead of just an address. And Ethan? Ethan moved through Ridge Haven like he owned it. Because in a way, he did. Teachers adored him. Not because he was a particularly good student. His grades were mediocre at best, but because he had that thing. That magnetic charisma that made you want to like him, want to help him, want to be part of whatever golden future he was obviously destined for. He called adults by their first names. He remembered birthdays. He shook hands with a grip that was firm but not threatening, looked you in the eye just long enough to make you feel seen. What a nice young man, people said. That Ethan Mercer, he's going places. The Mercers must be so proud. But here's what I've learned, after years of telling stories like this one. The brighter the spotlight, the darker the shadows it casts. And if you knew where to look, if you were paying attention instead of being dazzled, the shadows around Ethan Mercer were there all along. There was the incident in 8th grade. A girl named Danielle Hoffman who'd briefly dated Ethan, then tried to break up with him. She transferred to a private school in Toledo 2 weeks later. Her parents never explained why. When a reporter tried to track her down years later, after everything came out, Danielle's mother said only, "We don't talk about that boy. We never will." There was the family cat that belonged to the neighbors, a tabby named Whiskers who disappeared the same week Ethan got into an argument with their son over a borrowed video game. The cat was found 3 days later behind the elementary school. What was left of it, anyway? And there were the whispers among certain girls at Ridgehaven High. Nothing concrete. Nothing anyone would say out loud, at least not with their names attached. Just a feeling. A warning passed in hallways and locker rooms. Be careful around Ethan Mercer. Don't let him get you alone. Smile, be polite, but never give him a reason to focus on you. Most people didn't hear these whispers. Or if they did, they dismissed them as jealousy, resentment, the inevitable sniping that follows anyone successful in a small town. Ethan Mercer was going places. Everyone knew it. What they didn't know, what they refused to see, was that some of those places were very, very dark. And a quiet girl named Mia Castillo was about to stumble into the darkest one of all. Before Mia Castillo became a headline, before her yearbook photo was plastered across cable news and her name became a hashtag, she was just a girl with a dream and a plan to get there. Let me tell you about the Mia that the world never got to know. She was 15 years old, a sophomore at Ridgehaven High, and she was not like the other kids in that school. Not because she was strange or difficult. Quite the opposite. Mia was the kind of quiet that comes from watching more than speaking, from understanding that in a town like Ridgehaven, girls who looked like her and came from families like hers had to be twice as good to get half as far. Her parents, Carmen and Luis Castillo, had immigrated from Guatemala before Mia was born. They ran a small restaurant on the unfashionable end of Main Street. Sabor de Casa, it was called. Taste of home. The menu was handwritten in Spanish and English, the tables were mismatched, and the enchiladas were the best thing you'd ever put in your mouth, assuming you knew enough to find the place. The Ridgehaven Country Club set didn't eat there. But the nurses coming off night shifts at the hospital did. The construction workers did. The people who actually made the town run, they knew about Sabor de Casa. Mia grew up in that restaurant. Did her homework in the back booth while the smell of roasting peppers filled the air. Learned to bus tables at 8, work the register at 10, manage the weekend books by 12. She had a little brother named Diego who worshipped her, and a bedroom the size of a walk-in closet, and a wall covered in college brochures that she'd sent away for Ohio State, Michigan, Northwestern. The names of places that felt like prayers. She was going to be a doctor. That was the plan. Get a scholarship, get into pre-med, get out of Ridgehaven without leaving her family behind. She'd already mapped it out on a spreadsheet, every test score she'd need, every extracurricular that would matter, every dollar she'd have to save. And the tutoring. That was part of the plan too. Ridgehaven High had a program for student tutors, honor roll kids who helped struggling athletes stay eligible. It paid $12 an hour, which wasn't much, but it was something Mia could add to the college fund. Something she could put on applications. Something that proved she was serious in a way that Ridgehaven understood. When the assignment came through, Ethan Mercer, chemistry, Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, Mia didn't think twice. She knew who he was, of course. Everyone did. The quarterback. The golden boy. She'd seen him in the hallways, surrounded by his circle, moving through the school like he was walking on a private red carpet. She wasn't intimidated. She wasn't interested, either. Ethan Mercer existed in a completely different universe than Mia Castillo, and that was fine with her. She'd help him pass chemistry, add the hours to her resume, and move on. The first session was at the school library. Ethan showed up 10 minutes late, smelling like expensive cologne, and slid into the chair across from her with that famous smile. "So you're my savior, huh?" Mia didn't smile back. "I'm your tutor. Let's look at chapter 4. He laughed. Seemed genuinely amused by her directness. And for the next hour, he was fine. Charming, even. He asked about her family, her plans, seemed interested in a way that felt almost flattering. He was easier to teach than she'd expected. Not stupid, just lazy. Used to skating by on looks and charm instead of effort. When the session ended, he said, "Same time Thursday?" "That's the schedule." "Cool." He held her gaze a beat too long. "I think I'm going to like working with you, Mia." She gathered her books and left without looking back. That night, she wrote in her journal, Started tutoring Ethan Mercer today. He's not as dumb as people say. Kind of intense though. Weird energy. Weird energy. If only she'd trusted that instinct. If only someone had told her that the most dangerous predators are the ones who've learned to smile. But she didn't know. How could she? She was just a girl with a dream. And the nightmare was only beginning. It started slow. So slow that Mia didn't even recognize what was happening until she was already trapped. That's how predators work, you see. They don't announce themselves. They don't wear signs. They test boundaries the way you'd test the temperature of bathwater, 1 degree at a time, so gradual you don't notice you're being scalded until the burns are already there. The second tutoring session, Ethan brought her coffee. Remembered she'd mentioned liking caramel lattes. A small thing. A thoughtful thing. He's just being nice, she told herself. He's trying to make the sessions less awkward. The third session, he asked for her phone number. In case I have questions about the homework. That made sense. She gave it to him. The texts started that night. At first, they were about chemistry. Then they weren't. What are you up to? Thinking about you. Wish we could hang out outside of tutoring. Mia kept her responses short. Professional. She didn't want to be rude. This was Ethan Mercer, after all, and there were politics to consider, implications for her tutoring position, but she also didn't want to encourage him. It didn't matter. By the third week, Ethan had decided that Mia Castillo belonged to him. She just didn't know it yet. The appearances started. He'd show up at Sabor de Casa during her shifts, sliding into a booth and ordering nothing but coffee, watching her work. He'd be waiting by her locker in the morning, falling into step beside her like they were a couple. His friends started looking at her differently, curious, assessing, like she was a new piece of furniture in Ethan's life. Are you and Mercer like a thing? Her friend Sophia asked. No, Mia said. Absolutely not. But the hallways had already decided otherwise. And Ethan was doing nothing to correct them. The questions started next. Always casual, always smiling, but with an edge underneath that made Mia's stomach tighten. Who was that guy you were talking to after Spanish? Why didn't you answer my text last night? I drove by your house and your light was still on at midnight. Who were you talking to? He drove by her house. At midnight. Mia went to her guidance counselor, Mrs. Patterson. Explained that she wanted to stop tutoring Ethan Mercer. Personal reasons. She didn't go into details, didn't know how to articulate the creeping dread that had settled into her chest, just said she thought it would be better if someone else took over. Mrs. Patterson frowned. Mia, the Mercers are significant supporters of our athletic academic program. Ethan specifically requested you. I really think you should stick with it. It's only a few more weeks until the semester ends. He specifically requested me. Mia left the office feeling smaller than when she'd walked in. She tried to set boundaries. Stopped responding to non-academic texts. Kept the sessions strictly focused on chemistry. Made sure they only met in public places, the library, the coffee shop on Main Street, anywhere with witnesses. But Ethan wasn't deterred. If anything, her resistance seemed to excite him. The chase was part of the game. And then came the request that changed everything. Let's do the next session at my house, Ethan said, leaning across the library table. My mom wants to meet you. She's like, super grateful for how much you've helped me. She'll make snacks or whatever. Every instinct in Mia's body screamed no. But Ethan was already pulling out his phone, already texting his mother, already making it into a done deal. She says Friday at 6. I'll text you the address. Ethan, I really think. It's not a big deal, Mia. And there it was. That flash of something in his eyes. Something cold. Something that made her understand, on a level deeper than words, that saying no might have consequences she couldn't predict. It's just tutoring. At my house. With my mom there. What are you so worried about? What could she say? That she was scared of him? That his attention felt less like flattery and more like surveillance? That every time she looked in his eyes, she saw something waiting there, something patient and hungry and wrong? She couldn't prove anything. She was just a scholarship kid from the wrong side of town, and he was Ethan Mercer. So on November 8, 2019, Mia Castillo walked up the stone steps of the Mercer family home on Maple Ridge Drive. Karen Mercer answered the door with a warm smile. "You must be Mia. Ethan talks about you all the time." 10 minutes later, Karen left for a charity board meeting, and Mia was alone with him. "I'm going to tell you what happened next. But I'm not going to sensationalize it. I'm not going to turn Mia Castillo's final moments into entertainment. What I will tell you is this: it was fast, it was brutal, and it happened because a 17-year-old boy had never once in his life been told no, and when he finally was, he couldn't accept it. The tutoring session lasted about 45 minutes. Chemistry. Molecular bonds. The kind of mundane academic work that should have ended with Mia packing up her books and walking out the front door and going home to her family. Instead, when she stood to leave, Ethan blocked the doorway. "Stay a little longer. I need to get home. My parents are expecting me." "Your parents can wait." He moved closer. "I've been patient, Mia. I've been so patient with you." What happened in the next few minutes would later be reconstructed through forensic evidence, medical examiner reports, and the cold, clinical language of court documents. Mia said no. She tried to leave. Ethan's narcissistic rage, the rage of a boy king whose subject had dared to refuse him, exploded in an instant. The violence was not prolonged. There was no elaborate torture, no twisted game. It was the sudden volcanic fury of a predator who had finally dropped his mask, followed by the terrible silence that comes after. And here's what haunts me most about this story, what keeps me up at night when I think about Ethan Mercer, what came after. Because most killers, even the ones who act in rage, experience something in the aftermath. Panic. Regret. Horror at what they've done. Their hands shake. They vomit. They call 911 and confess because they can't live with the weight of it. Ethan Mercer did none of these things. He stood in that room, looked at what he had done, and his first thought was about logistics. The cleanup took approximately 90 minutes. Investigators would later marvel at how thorough it was for someone with no prior experience. He wrapped Mia's body in plastic sheeting from his father's garage. He bleached the floor, the walls, every surface she might have touched. He loaded her into the trunk of his car with the same casual efficiency you might use to load groceries. The drainage culvert was 3 miles outside of town, at the edge of an abandoned industrial site. Ethan had driven past it dozens of times on his way to away games. Later, prosecutors would argue, and the jury would agree, that he had scouted this location in advance. That some part of him had always known this night would come. He left Mia there, in the cold and the dark, like she was garbage. Like she was nothing. And then, and I need you to really hear this, he went to a party. Tyler Brennan's house. Half the football team was there. Ethan showed up around 11, grabbed a beer, laughed at someone's joke. Multiple witnesses would later testify that he seemed completely normal. Relaxed. Happy, even. "Dude, where were you?" his teammate Marcus asked. "Had to deal with some stuff," Ethan said. "Family thing." He stayed until 1 in the morning. Took a selfie that would later surface during the trial, Ethan with his arm around 2 cheerleaders, grinning at the camera, while 3 miles away, Mia Castillo's body lay in a drainage ditch. But here's the thing about perfect crimes. They don't exist. Every murderer leaves something behind. Every cover-up has a crack. And Ethan Mercer, for all his cold efficiency, had made a mistake. A single hair. One strand of Mia's hair, caught in the zipper of his jacket, transferred to the culvert where he'd left her. It would take 3 days for someone to find the body. It would take 3 months for the DNA to come back. But the clock had already started ticking. And the golden boy of Ridgehaven, Ohio, had no idea that his empire was built on sand. Now, if this story has gripped you the way it's gripped me, I want you to do something. Drop a like on this video. It helps more than you know. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time, because the investigation that brought Ethan Mercer down, that's where this story really starts to turn. Stay with me. 3 days. That's how long Mia Castillo lay in that drainage culvert before anyone found her. 3 days while her parents called hospitals and police stations, while her little brother Diego sat by the window waiting for his sister to come home, while the Ridgehaven community murmured about runaways and teenage drama, and you know how these immigrant families can be. 3 days while Ethan Mercer went to school, threw a football, kissed his mother on the cheek, and slept like a baby in his 400 thread count sheets. It was a jogger who found her. Marcus Webb, 43, training for the Columbus Marathon. He'd taken a detour through the old industrial area on the edge of town. Better hills, fewer cars, and had stopped to catch his breath near a drainage culvert that fed into Ridgehaven Creek. The smell hit him first. I'm not going to describe what Marcus Webb saw when he looked into that culvert. What I will tell you is that he called 911 at 7:23 a.m. on November 11, 2019, and by the time the first patrol car arrived, he was sitting on the ground 20 feet away, shaking so badly he couldn't hold his phone. Within hours, Ridgehaven's illusion of safety had shattered into a million pieces. Yellow crime scene tape. State forensic vans. News helicopters circling overhead like vultures smelling carrion. The Castillo family, who had spent 3 days being told their daughter had probably run off with a boyfriend, standing behind a police barricade while officers in hazmat suits carried evidence bags out of a drainage ditch. Carmen Castillo collapsed. Right there on the gravel, in front of the cameras. Her husband caught her before she hit the ground, but the image was captured, broadcast that night on every local news channel, shared thousands of times on social media. A mother's heart breaking in real time. And the town? The town didn't know what to do with itself. Candlelight vigils sprouted up within days. Mia's yearbook photo appeared on poster boards, on T-shirts, on the windows of Main Street businesses. Teachers who had barely noticed her when she was alive gave tearful interviews about what a bright student she'd been. The football team wore black armbands at their next game, a gesture that, knowing what we know now, curdles the stomach. But while Ridgehaven was busy performing its grief, someone was actually doing the work. Detective Rosa Vega had been with the county sheriff's department for 15 years, and she had seen enough death to know that this one was different. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This wasn't a random act of violence. The location was too deliberate, the body too carefully placed. Whoever killed Mia Castillo had thought about it beforehand. Rosa was 47 years old, the daughter of Mexican immigrants who had worked the fields outside Toledo before opening a small grocery store. She had put herself through community college, then the police academy, then night school for a criminal justice degree. Nothing had been handed to her. Everything she had earned through patience, persistence, and an almost supernatural ability to sit with uncomfortable truths until they revealed their secrets. She started where every good investigator starts, the victim's last known movements. Mia left school at 3:15 p.m. on November 8th. Her friend Sofia Reyes confirmed they had walked to the parking lot together. Mia mentioned she had a tutoring session. She seemed tired, maybe a little stressed, but nothing alarming. She got into her car, a 12-year-old Honda Civic her parents had saved for 2 years to buy, and drove away. The tutoring session. Sophia remembered the name. Ethan Mercer. Rosa wrote it in her notebook and circled it twice. That night, she pulled Mia's phone records. Hundreds of texts from one number in the weeks before her death. The messages started academic, then turned personal, then turned, Rosa noted with a detective's cold precision, obsessive. I can't stop thinking about you. Why are you ignoring me? You're mine, Mia. You just don't know it yet. All from Ethan Mercer's phone. Rosa Vega leaned back in her chair and looked at the photo of Mia Castillo pinned to her corkboard. 15 years old. Whole life ahead of her. Reduced to evidence bags and autopsy reports. I'm going to find out who did this to you, she said quietly. I promise. The golden boy of Ridgehaven had no idea what was coming. Before we go any further into the investigation, I need you to understand Karen Mercer. Not the woman who stood up in that courtroom. We'll get back to her. I mean the Karen Mercer who existed before. The one who spent 18 months defending a monster because she couldn't, or wouldn't, see what was right in front of her. Because here's the uncomfortable truth about Karen. She wasn't a bad person. She wasn't cruel or heartless or indifferent to suffering. She was, by all accounts, a devoted mother, a generous community member, a woman who genuinely believed she was doing the right thing. And that's what makes her story so terrifying. Karen Elizabeth Mercer, née Holloway, grew up in a small town in Indiana where appearances were everything and silence was a virtue. Her own father was a functioning alcoholic who never raised his hand but raised his voice plenty. Her mother's response was to smile wider, clean harder, pretend the bruises, emotional if not physical, simply didn't exist. Karen learned early that the role of a good wife, a good mother, was to protect the family image at all costs. She married Doug Mercer at 22, had Ethan at 24, and poured every ounce of her unfulfilled ambition into her son. He would be everything she never got to be. Successful, admired, perfect. The warning signs were there from the beginning. She told herself they weren't. When 6-year-old Ethan pushed a classmate down the stairs and laughed as the boy cried, Karen explained it as boys being boys. When 12-year-old Ethan was caught with photos of dead animals on his computer, photos he'd taken himself, she accepted his explanation that it was for a science project and deleted the evidence. When the Hoffman girls' family pulled her out of school after dating Ethan, Karen convinced herself it was about grades, about private school opportunities, about anything other than her son. She had built her entire identity around Ethan's golden image. To question that image would be to question everything. So when Detective Vega came to the Mercer house on November 13th, asking to speak with Ethan about his relationship with Mia Castillo, Karen's response was immediate and absolute. My son had nothing to do with that poor girl's death. He tutored with her, that's all. He was home with us that entire evening. Vega's eyebrow twitched, the only sign of her skepticism. Ma'am, we have text messages that suggest. I don't care what you have. Karen's voice turned to ice. Ethan is a good boy. A great boy. And I won't have you dragging his name through the mud because you need someone to blame. That afternoon, Karen called Richard Calloway, the most expensive defense attorney in the region. Ethan wasn't even a formal suspect yet. It didn't matter. She was building the fortress. For weeks, Karen was everywhere, organizing counter-narratives, calling in favors, quietly pressuring anyone who might speak against Ethan. She appeared at a press conference alongside Doug, tearful but composed, pleading for the community to remember who my son really is, and not be swayed by vicious rumors. She believed it. That's the tragedy. She actually believed her own words. But then came the afternoon that cracked the foundation. 3 weeks after Mia's body was found, Karen was gathering laundry from Ethan's room. A normal chore. A normal day. She opened his sock drawer looking for strays that had migrated from the hamper, and her hand touched something cold. Metal. Delicate. She pulled it out. A bracelet. Silver, with small turquoise beads. The kind of simple, pretty thing a teenage girl might wear. Karen stood frozen in her son's bedroom, holding that bracelet, and somewhere deep in her brain, in the part she'd spent years learning to silence, a voice whispered, "You know whose this is. You saw it on the news. In the photos." Mia Castillo's bracelet. In her son's sock drawer. Karen's hands trembled. Her vision blurred. For one long moment, she stood at a crossroads, truth on one side, the comfortable lie on the other. She put the bracelet back. She closed the drawer. She walked out of the room and poured herself a glass of wine and did not think about it. Not consciously. Not yet. But the crack was there now. And cracks, as we know, have a way of spreading. While Karen Mercer was busy building walls around her denial, Detective Rosa Vega was quietly, methodically dismantling her son's alibis. Let me walk you through how a case like this comes together, because it's not like television, not really. There's no dramatic music, no single aha moment where everything clicks. It's more like assembling a puzzle in a dark room, feeling for edges, testing pieces, slowly building a picture you desperately hope you're wrong about. The forensic evidence came first. The single hair found on Mia's clothing matched Ethan Mercer's DNA with a probability of 1 in 4.2 billion. The soil samples from beneath her fingernails contained trace minerals consistent with the landscaping around the Mercer property, a custom blend their gardener had specially ordered. And Ethan's cell phone, despite his claims of being home all night, had pinged a tower near the drainage culvert at 10:47 p.m. on November 8th. But Rosa knew that forensics alone don't convict. Juries want stories. They want to understand why. So she requested an interview with Ethan. Voluntary. No charges filed yet. Just a conversation to clear things up. Richard Calloway advised against it. Strongly. Emphatically. With the kind of urgency that comes from 30 years of watching clients talk themselves into prison cells. Ethan overruled him. "I've got nothing to hide," he told his parents, flashing that quarterback smile. "Let them ask their questions. I'll charm their pants off." That was his exact phrase. Charm their pants off. His mother would remember it later, in the dark hours when she couldn't sleep, and wonder how she'd ever thought it sounded confident instead of chilling. The interview took place on December 3, 2019, in a beige interrogation room at the county sheriff's office. Rosa Vega sat across from Ethan Mercer, a manila folder in front of her, a recorder running in the corner. And for 45 minutes, she let him talk. Here's what strikes you when you watch that footage. And yes, portions of it were played at trial, so I've seen it multiple times. Ethan Mercer doesn't act like an innocent person. He doesn't act like a guilty person, either. He acts like a person who genuinely believes the rules don't apply to him. He leaned back in his chair, legs spread wide, taking up space. He smiled at Rosa like they were having coffee, like this was a minor inconvenience between two people who both understood he'd be walking out of here untouched. He called her Rosa instead of Detective Vega. He asked about her family. And when she started asking about Mia, he contradicted himself 3 times in 10 minutes. First, he said he barely knew her, just a tutor, no personal connection. Then he admitted to the texts but called them friendly. Then he claimed Mia had been pursuing him, that he'd been trying to let her down easy. Rosa's face remained impassive throughout. But inside, she was taking notes. The moment that would later become famous, the moment prosecutors would replay for the jury, came near the end of the interview. "Ethan," Rosa said, "Mia Castillo is dead. A 15-year-old girl who was last seen at your house is dead. And you're sitting here smiling. Why is that?" Ethan's grin didn't waver. "Because I didn't do anything wrong. And honestly, this whole thing is kind of killing my scholarship prospects. Is there someone I can talk to about that?" A 15-year-old girl was dead. And he was worried about football scholarships. Rosa ended the interview shortly after. She had what she needed. But the real break came 3 weeks later, the midpoint twist that transformed a strong case into an airtight one. A neighbor of the Mercers, Helen Caldwell, had recently installed a security camera after a string of package thefts. The camera faced her driveway but caught a sliver of the street in its peripheral view. On November 8, at 11:47 p.m., exactly 1 hour before Ethan supposedly went to bed, the camera captured his silver BMW pulling out of the Mercer driveway and heading toward the edge of town. Toward the industrial area. Toward the culvert where Mia's body was found. The timestamp was clear. The license plate was visible. The driver's silhouette was unmistakably Ethan. When Rosa Vega saw that footage, she allowed herself one small moment of satisfaction. One quiet nod to the photograph of Mia Castillo still pinned to her corkboard. Got him. The arrest warrant was issued 2 days later. And Ethan Mercer's charmed life was about to come crashing down. In the weeks between the interview and the arrest, something began to change in Ethan Mercer. The golden boy was tarnishing. At first, it was subtle. A snap of temper at the dinner table when his father asked about the investigation. A slammed door when a college scout called to say they were pausing their recruitment discussions pending resolution of the current situation. A coldness in his eyes when he looked at his mother, like he was calculating something, measuring her usefulness. Then it stopped being subtle. Ethan's classmates began to notice. The easy charm that had defined him was flickering, replaced by something harder and more volatile. He got into a shoving match in the hallway with a sophomore who'd made a comment. No one was quite sure what, about Mia Castillo. He cornered Sofia Reyes in the parking lot, demanding to know what she'd told the police, his face inches from hers until a teacher intervened. And then there was the incident with the cat. The Mercers had a tabby named Biscuit, an 11-year-old rescue who spent most of her time sleeping in patches of sunlight and ignoring the family who fed her. Karen adored that cat. It was the one creature in the house who asked nothing of her, expected nothing, offered only the simple comfort of a warm body and a purring engine. On January 14, 2020, Karen came home from grocery shopping to find Biscuit dead in the backyard. Her neck had been broken. Ethan blamed coyotes. "They've been getting more aggressive," he said, not looking up from his phone. "Saw it on the news." But Karen had seen the body before Doug disposed of it. There were no bite marks. No signs of a struggle. Biscuit had been killed cleanly, deliberately, by human hands. She didn't say anything. She couldn't. The words simply wouldn't form. But that night, lying awake at 3 a.m. while her husband snored beside her, Karen found herself thinking about the bracelet in Ethan's drawer. About the cat. About all the small moments over the years that she'd explained away, rationalized, buried beneath the weight of her desperate need to believe. She got out of bed, walked to Ethan's room, stood outside his door, listening to the silence within. She didn't go in. Not yet. But she couldn't look away anymore. The town was starting to turn, too. It happened gradually, a whisper network that spread through church pews and PDA meetings and the checkout lines at the grocery store. People who had defended Ethan began to grow quiet. People who had doubted the accusations began to reconsider. The Ridgehaven Wolves football coach announced that Ethan was taking a leave of absence from the team, and no one protested. Former friends stopped calling. Invitations to parties dried up. The Mercer House, once the social hub of Maple Ridge Drive, became a place people drove past quickly, not looking too closely. And Ethan? Ethan watched it all happen with a fury that he could barely contain. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not to him. He was special. He was untouchable. He was Ethan Mercer. Karen found the journal 2 days before the arrest. She wasn't snooping, not exactly. She was looking for something, anything, that might help her keep believing in her son's innocence. She searched his room while he was at school, telling herself she was looking for proof that this was all a terrible mistake. Instead, she found a black notebook hidden beneath a loose floorboard in his closet. The entries dated back 2 years. They described girls. Specific girls. What Ethan wanted to do to them. How he imagined their faces when they realized they couldn't escape. Detailed fantasies of control, of possession, of destruction. Mia Castillo's name appeared 17 times. There were other names, too. Girls who had never been harmed, perhaps only because the opportunity hadn't presented itself. Plans that had never been executed. A roadmap of a predator's evolving psychology. Karen photographed every page. Her hands shook so badly the first few images came out blurred. But she kept going. Page after page after page. When she finished, she put the notebook back exactly where she'd found it. And she waited. She wasn't sure what she was waiting for. But she knew now what her son really was. The only question was whether she had the courage to do something about it. February 12, 2020. A Wednesday. Overcast. The kind of gray Ohio winter day where the sky seems to press down on you like a weight. Ethan Mercer arrived at Ridgehaven High School at 7:45 a.m., parking his silver BMW in the spot closest to the main entrance, the spot that had been unofficially reserved for him since sophomore year. He grabbed his backpack, checked his hair in the rearview mirror, and walked toward the building with the same confident stride he'd always had. He never made it to first period. Detective Rosa Vega had coordinated the arrest with deliberate precision. She could have picked him up at home. It would have been easier, quieter, less of a spectacle. But Rosa had been doing this job long enough to understand that sometimes the spectacle was the point. Ethan Mercer had built his entire identity on the image of invincibility. On being the golden boy who could do no wrong. If that image was going to shatter, it needed to shatter publicly, permanently, in front of everyone who had ever looked the other way. So when Ethan walked through the front doors of Ridgehaven High, he was met by 4 uniformed officers and 1 detective with a warrant. "Ethan Mercer," Rosa said, her voice carrying across the crowded lobby, "you are under arrest for the murder of Mia Castillo. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The hallway went dead quiet. Later, students would describe the moment in almost cinematic terms. The way Ethan's face flickered, just for a second, before the mask slammed back into place. The way the officers positioned themselves around him, not aggressively but unmistakably in control. The way the crowd parted as he was led toward the exit, backpack still dangling from one shoulder, hands cuffed behind his back. Someone's phone was recording. Of course it was. The video would be viewed 18 million times before the day was over. In the footage, you can see Ethan turn his head just before he reaches the doors. His eyes scan the crowd, looking for what? Allies. Sympathy. Some last reserve of social capital that might save him? He finds none. And then his gaze locks onto something. Someone. A girl in the crowd, pressing back against the lockers like she's trying to disappear. Sophia Reyes. Mia's best friend. Ethan smiles at her. A cold, deliberate smile. A smile that says, I see you. I remember you. This isn't over. Then he's pushed through the doors and into the waiting squad car, and Ridgehaven High School erupts into chaos. The charges were announced that afternoon. Murder in the first degree. The prosecution had successfully argued to try Ethan as an adult, citing the premeditated nature of the crime, the evidence of advance planning, and the defendant's apparent lack of remorse. Richard Calloway held a press conference outside the county courthouse, flanked by Doug and Karen Mercer. His statement was measured, professional, exactly what you'd expect from an $800 an hour attorney. Ethan Mercer is a 17-year-old boy with no prior criminal record and a lifetime of achievement ahead of him. The charges against him are based on circumstantial evidence and prosecutorial overreach. We are confident that when all the facts are presented, Ethan will be fully exonerated. Behind Calloway, Karen Mercer stood with her hands clasped in front of her, her face arranged in an expression of supportive determination. But if you looked closely, and a few people did, you would have noticed that her eyes were focused on something in the distance. Something no one else could see. She was holding her phone in her pocket. On that phone were photographs of a bracelet and a journal. Evidence that could destroy her son. She hadn't decided what to do with it. Not yet. But the clock was ticking toward a courtroom. And somewhere inside Karen Mercer, the mother and the conscience were going to war. The trial began on September 7, 2021, nearly 2 years after Mia Castillo took her last breath in the Mercer family living room. 2 years. Think about that for a moment. 2 years of motions and countermotions. 2 years of legal maneuvering, psychiatric evaluations, and fierce battles over what evidence the jury would be allowed to see. 2 years during which Ethan Mercer remained free on a $2 million bond, confined to his family's estate, monitored by an ankle bracelet that he reportedly referred to as his jewelry. 2 years during which Carmen and Luis Castillo buried their daughter, closed their restaurant because they couldn't bear to stand in the place where she'd grown up, and watched their son Diego stop speaking almost entirely. Justice, it turns out, moves slowly. Grief does not. The Ridgehaven County Courthouse became ground zero for a media circus the likes of which this quiet Ohio town had never seen. Satellite trucks lined the streets. Reporters camped on the courthouse steps. Legal analysts dissected every development on cable news, their graphics splashed with phrases like "Golden Boy Murder Trial" and "Quarterback Accused." Inside courtroom 4B, the reality was somehow both more mundane and more devastating than the spectacle outside suggested. The prosecution's case was methodical, surgical. Assistant District Attorney Patricia Okonkwo walked the jury through the evidence piece by piece, building a wall of facts that left no room for reasonable doubt. The DNA evidence, the cell phone records, the security camera footage from Helen Caldwell's driveway, the text messages, hundreds of them, that painted a portrait of obsession escalating toward violence. But the moment that broke the courtroom, the moment that made hardened journalists look away and caused one juror to openly weep, came on the 4th day of testimony. Carmen Castillo took the stand. She was 51 years old but looked 70. Grief had carved itself into her face, hollowed out her cheeks, turned her hair gray at the temples. She wore a simple black dress and held, in her trembling hands, a photograph. Mia's quinceañera portrait. Her daughter at 15, wearing a lavender gown, smiling at the camera with the kind of pure, unself-conscious joy that only exists before life teaches you to guard yourself. "This is my baby," Carmen said, her voice barely above a whisper but somehow filling every corner of that silent room. She wanted to be a doctor. She wanted to help people. She was going to be the first person in our family to go to college. She looked directly at Ethan Mercer. You took everything from her. Everything she was going to be. Everything she was going to do. You took her from me, from her father, from her little brother who cries every night because his sister isn't coming home. Ethan's face remained impassive. But I want you to notice something. Something the cameras caught that the jury surely noticed too. Throughout Carmen's testimony, Ethan's right knee was bouncing. A rapid, almost frantic rhythm. And when Carmen held up that photograph, his jaw tightened so hard you could see the muscles cord beneath his skin. The mask was still on. But it was slipping. The defense countered with exactly the strategy everyone expected. Richard Calloway brought in psychologists who testified about adolescent brain development, about impulse control, about the capacity for rehabilitation in young offenders. He painted a picture of a promising young man who had made a single, terrible mistake. Emphasis on single, emphasis on young, emphasis on all the life left to live. Ethan Mercer is not a monster, Calloway told the jury in his closing argument. He is a 17-year-old boy. A child, legally and developmentally. The prosecution wants you to throw away his entire future based on one night. One terrible, tragic night that he will regret for the rest of his life. One night. As if Mia Castillo's entire existence could be reduced to an inconvenient evening in Ethan Mercer's otherwise promising timeline. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They returned with a verdict of guilty on all counts. Murder in the first degree. The courtroom erupted. Carmen Castillo collapsed into her husband's arms. The defense table sat in stunned silence. And Ethan Mercer, for the first time since this whole ordeal began, looked genuinely surprised. But the story wasn't over. Not yet. Because in criminal cases, the verdict is only half the battle. What comes next is sentencing. And in the gallery, sitting 3 rows behind the defense table, Karen Mercer clutched a manila envelope she had been carrying for 18 months. Inside that envelope was the photograph of the bracelet. Inside that envelope were the pages from the journal. Inside that envelope was the truth about who her son really was. And she was about to decide whether the world would ever see it. November 14th, 2021. Sentencing Day. We've come full circle now, back to the moment where this story began. The courtroom, the tension, the 53 people packed into those polished wooden pews. But now you understand the weight of it. Now you know who Mia Castillo was, and who Ethan Mercer is, and what Karen Mercer has been carrying in that envelope for 18 agonizing months. Now you're ready to watch it all come crashing down. The defense had orchestrated the sentencing hearing like a theatrical production. Every element designed to evoke sympathy, to humanize Ethan, to convince Judge Ruth Holloway that this brilliant young man deserved a second chance. Doug Mercer spoke first. Ethan's father, red-faced and sweating in a suit that probably cost more than most jurors made in a month. He talked about football scholarships, about Ethan's potential, about how his son had made a mistake, but shouldn't have to pay for it with his entire life. A mistake. Like Mia Castillo was a fender bender. An overdue library book. Next came Pastor David Wheeler from Ridgehaven Community Church. He spoke of redemption, of forgiveness, of the Christian obligation to believe in the possibility of change. He never once mentioned Mia's name. Then Dr. Eleanor Vance, a forensic psychologist the defense had paid $12,000 to evaluate Ethan. She testified about rehabilitation potential, about the neuroplasticity of the adolescent brain, about how, with proper treatment and supervision, Ethan could be reformed. Could be. Might be. Perhaps. All of it building toward Richard Calloway's final request, probation. Juvenile detention until age 21. A sealed record that would disappear when Ethan became a legal adult, allowing him to start fresh. To rebuild. To move on. Move on. As if Mia Castillo ever could. Through all of this, Ethan sat at the defense table in his charcoal-tailored suit, the one Karen had picked out, the one she now couldn't look at without feeling sick, and he smiled. That slight, confident upturn at the corners of his mouth. The expression of a boy who had never faced a consequence that money and charm couldn't erase. He thought he was going to walk out of that courtroom with a slap on the wrist and his future intact. He was wrong. Judge Holloway shuffled her papers, prepared to speak. The room held its breath. And then, a rustle of fabric. A creak of wood. 53 heads turning toward the sound. Karen Mercer was standing. I need you to understand what this moment cost her. This was not a decision she had made lightly. For 18 months, she had been at war with herself. Mother against conscience, love against truth, the desperate need to protect her child against the unbearable knowledge of what that child had done. She had not slept the night before, had not eaten, had spent hours staring at herself in the bathroom mirror, asking the reflection whether she was strong enough to do what needed to be done. The reflection had not answered. Karen had to answer for herself. "Your Honor," she said, and her voice did not waver. "I need to tell you who my son really is." Chaos erupted. Richard Calloway shot to his feet, objecting. Doug Mercer grabbed for his wife's arm, hissing something urgent and angry. Ethan's smile vanished, replaced, for the first time, by something that looked almost like fear. "I'll allow it," Judge Holloway said. And something in her eyes, curiosity, recognition, perhaps even respect, settled over the courtroom like a gavel strike. Karen walked to the witness stand. She did not look at her husband. She did not look at her son. She looked at the judge, and at the Castillo family sitting rigid with grief in the front row, and at the envelope in her hands. "I should have done this 18 months ago," she said. "I found this in my son's room 3 weeks after Mia Castillo was murdered." She opened the envelope. The bracelet photograph came first. Silver chain. Turquoise beads. Mia's bracelet, found in Ethan's sock drawer, photographed on the day Karen first discovered it, and chose to look away. Then the journal pages. Page after page after page. Fantasies of control. Detailed plans for violence. Names of girls. Not just Mia, but others. Girls who had been lucky enough to escape. Girls who had never known how close they'd come. Karen read selections aloud. Her voice steady. Clinical. As if describing someone else's nightmare. And as she read, Ethan Mercer began to unravel. It started as twitching. His leg bouncing, his fingers drumming. Then muttering, low, angry words that the microphones couldn't quite catch. Then, as his mother described a journal entry about Mia, about what he wanted to do to her, what he had planned to do to her, Ethan Mercer lunged to his feet. "Shut up!" he screamed, his face twisted with rage. "Shut up, you stupid!" Court officers swarmed the defense table. Cameras flashed. The courtroom exploded into chaos. And Karen Mercer stood at the witness stand, tears streaming down her face, watching the monster she had raised finally reveal himself to the world. The courtroom took nearly 15 minutes to restore order. 15 minutes of chaos while Ethan Mercer screamed obscenities at his mother, while court officers wrestled him back into his seat, while cameras captured every second of the Golden Boy's spectacular implosion. 15 minutes during which Karen Mercer stood motionless at the witness stand, tears drying on her cheeks, watching the son she had loved become a stranger she didn't recognize. Or maybe, and this is the harder truth, watching him become exactly who he had always been. When silence finally settled over courtroom 4B, Judge Ruth Holloway looked at Ethan Mercer with an expression that contained no sympathy. No leniency. Only the cold, clear-eyed assessment of a woman who had just witnessed a mask shatter into 1,000 irreparable pieces. "I've presided over this bench for 23 years, she said. "I have seen remorse. I have seen rehabilitation. I have seen young people make terrible mistakes and genuinely grow from them." She paused. "I have seen none of that here." She turned to Karen Mercer, still standing at the witness stand. "Mrs. Mercer, what you did today took extraordinary courage. I want you to know that the court recognizes the profound personal cost of your testimony." Karen nodded. Said nothing. What was there to say? Judge Holloway returned her gaze to Ethan. "Ethan Mercer, the evidence presented in this trial, and the evidence revealed today by your own mother, paints a portrait not of a young man who made a single tragic mistake, but of a predator who planned, executed, and showed no remorse for the murder of an innocent girl. The journal entries demonstrate a pattern of violent ideation that suggests significant risk of future harm. The court cannot, in good conscience, release you into society. She straightened the papers before her. The room held its breath. I hereby sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The Castillo family collapsed into each other's arms. Carmen's sobs filled the courtroom. Grief and relief and rage and exhaustion all tangled together in a sound that no one who heard it would ever forget. Doug Mercer sat frozen, staring at the table in front of him like a man who had just watched his entire world burn to the ground. And Ethan? As the officers approached to lead him away, Ethan Mercer looked at his mother one final time. The mask was gone. What remained underneath was cold, empty. A void where a human soul should have been. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His eyes said everything. I will never forgive you. Karen held his gaze. And in that moment, she made her peace with it. The aftermath unfolded quietly, away from the cameras. Karen divorced Doug within 6 months. He never forgave her for what he called betraying the family. She never asked him to. She sold the house on Maple Ridge Drive, left Ridgehaven entirely, moved to a small town in Vermont where nobody knew her name. 3 months after the trial, she released a single public statement. I loved my son, but I loved the idea of who I wanted him to be, not the person he actually was. Mia Castillo deserved a mother who chose her truth over my comfort. I only wish I had found my courage sooner. What do we take from this story? Maybe it's this: monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like golden boys with perfect smiles. Sometimes they live in beautiful houses on tree-lined streets. Sometimes they're raised by people who loved them, but loved their own illusions more. And sometimes, not often enough, but sometimes, the truth finds a way to rise. Karen Mercer will carry the weight of what her son did for the rest of her life. But she will also carry something else. The knowledge that when it mattered most, when the cost was highest, she chose justice over blood. She chose to see. That's not redemption. Not exactly. But it's something. Now, before you go, I want to ask one last thing. If this story moved you, if Mia Castillo's memory deserves to be carried forward, share this video with someone. Not for the algorithm, not for the numbers, but because stories like this matter. Because the monsters are real, and the only way we fight them is by refusing to look away. Subscribe if you haven't already. Leave a comment telling me what you thought. And remember, the next time someone tells you about a golden boy who could never do anything wrong, ask yourself what they're choosing not to see. I'll see you in the next one.